The beans were not adequate. I need to be very clear about this, because Callum said they were adequate, and Callum is wrong. And the only creature in this entire household who understands the magnitude of how wrong he is stands 17 hands high and smells like hay. Titus, I said, pointing my wooden spoon at the horse for emphasis. I soaked those beans for 14 hours. 14. I used the smoked hock from Garrity's, which costs more per pound than some of the furniture in our bedroom. I put in a bay leaf. Not a bay leaf, the bay leaf, the one from the bush my grandmother planted when she was 19 years old. That bay leaf has heritage, Titus. That bay leaf has provenance. Titus regarded me with his enormous brown eyes. He was chewing. He was always chewing. The slow, circular rhythm of his jaw gave him an air of deep philosophical consideration, like a tenured professor listening to a promising but slightly unhinged doctoral candidate. And he sat there, I continued, pacing the length of the stall, at the head of the table, in front of the entire pack, took one bite and said, and I am quoting directly, "The beans are adequate." Adequate, Titus. That's what you call a ceasefire with a neighboring pack. That is what you call weather that is neither raining nor not raining. It is not what you call a cassoulet that took me 2 days and a meaningful percentage of my dignity to produce. Titus swished his tail. I chose to interpret this as wholehearted solidarity. We are confiding in livestock, the wolf side of my mind observed. Her register was dry, clipped, and permanently unimpressed, like a field medic who had seen too many self-inflicted wounds to muster sympathy. Again, I ignored her. The wolf had opinions about everything. She had opinions about my cooking, my posture, my tendency to gesture with kitchen implements, and my ongoing emotional relationship with a horse. Her opinions were noted and filed under not helpful. The worst part, I told Titus, leaning against his stall door, is that I know he didn't mean it as an insult. He meant it as a compliment. In Callum's head, adequate is high praise. Adequate means this meets the standard. The man has a vocabulary of 400 words, and 3 of them are tactical. He just doesn't have the language for, Freya, this cassoulet was a life-changing experience, and I am a better man for having eaten it. Titus nudged my hand. I scratched behind his ear. You get it, I said. You always get it. He is a horse, my wolf said. He gets oats. I should explain how this started. Callum, my mate, the alpha of the Stonecrag pack, a man whose presence can silence a room of 200 shifters just by standing up, talks to his horse. I discovered this about 3 months after I moved into the pack house. I'd gone down to the stables late one evening looking for a bridle that had gone missing from the tack room. What I found instead was the most powerful wolf in 4 counties, leaning his forehead against a horse's neck, murmuring in a voice I had never heard him use with me. And the border dispute with the Ashford pack is going to be a problem, he was saying. Connell is pushing for a harder line, but if I push back too far, I lose the moderates on the council. And the grain shipment from the valley is 3 days late, which means I need to either find a secondary supplier or ration what we have. And rationing makes people nervous, and nervous people make stupid decisions, and... He paused. Titus huffed a warm breath against his hair. I know, Callum said, as if the horse had offered sage counsel. You're right. One thing at a time. I stood in the doorway, frozen, watching the alpha of the Stonecrag pack have a therapeutic breakthrough with a herbivore. His shoulders, which were permanently set somewhere between carrying the weight of the pack and carrying the weight of the world, had actually dropped. His voice, usually a controlled bass that carried the careful weight of every word, was soft, almost gentle. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, like he'd put something down. I backed out silently and went to bed. I didn't mention it, but I thought about it constantly. Callum had a confidant. Callum had someone he could be unguarded with. And that someone was a horse. Interesting, my wolf had said at the time. He trusts the horse more than he trusts us. That's not what this is, I'd whispered in the dark. His shoulders dropped, his voice changed register. His heart rate decreased by approximately 12 beats per minute. Those are trust indicators. He does none of those things with us. She wasn't wrong, and it stung in a way I couldn't quite name. Not jealousy exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that whispered, he can be that version of himself with a horse, but not with you. What does that say about you? I filed it away. I'm good at filing things away. I have an entire internal cabinet system dedicated to feelings I'm not ready to examine. The first time I talked to Titus myself, it was an accident. Callum and I had argued about the window, the Great Window Incident, as I now refer to it, because if you're going to have a domestic dispute, you might as well give it a title worthy of a diplomatic crisis. The facts of the case. I had left the bedroom window open overnight. It was May, the weather was mild. A pleasant breeze was involved. Callum's position was that an open window on the second floor of the pack house constituted a security vulnerability. My position was that we lived in a fortified stone manor surrounded by 200 wolves, and the only thing invading through that window was fresh air and possibly a moth. We'd gone 3 rounds on this. Callum had used the word perimeter 4 times. I had used the word ridiculous 6. We'd reached the stage of the argument where we were both technically right and absolutely unwilling to concede a single inch. I stomped down to the stables because I needed to be somewhere that wasn't our bedroom, and because I'd seen him do it, and because I was just angry enough to try. Titus was in his stall, peaceful and enormous. He looked up when I came in, his ears pricked forward. "Titus," I said, hands on my hips, "your man has lost his mind. It was one window, open, for 8 hours, in May." Titus blinked. He acted like I'd taken down an entire wall of the eastern perimeter. He used the phrase, access point. "Titus, I have been mated to this man for 9 months, and he referred to our bedroom window as an access point." Titus chewed. "I'm not unreasonable," I said, beginning to pace. "I understand that he's the alpha, and he has to think about security. I respect that. But there is a line between responsible vigilance and obsessive paranoia about ventilation. He crossed it. He crossed it at speed." Something happened while I was talking. The knot in my chest, the tight, hot thing that lived there after every argument, began to loosen. Not because Titus was offering solutions, not because he was taking sides, but because he was there and he was listening, and he wasn't going to interrupt me to explain why the window was, in fact, strategically significant. It was, I realized with a start, the most heard I had felt in months. "Oh," my wolf said quietly. "Oh, that's not good." But it was good. It was so good that I went back the next night, and the night after that. It became a ritual, my private debrief, the secret meetings of the Titus Council, membership 1. Whenever Callum did something that made my eye twitch, which was often, because I loved the man desperately and he had the emotional vocabulary of a fence post, I would wait until evening, slip down to the stables, and tell Titus about it. The topics ranged widely. He told Ronan my pie was serviceable, Titus. Serviceable. That's what you say about a bridge. He bought me a new coat for my birthday. It's a beautiful coat. It is also a coat he picked because it has reinforced stitching in the shoulders for durability. He gave me tactical outerwear for my birthday, Titus. He said he liked my hair today. Then he said it was practical. He complimented my hair by calling it practical. I'm going to scream. Through it all, Titus stood and listened and occasionally nudged me for treats. He was magnificent. He was my rock. He was a 15-year-old Clydesdale cross who had somehow become the most important relationship in my marriage. "This is sustainable," my wolf said, dripping sarcasm. "Definitely not a symptom of a larger problem." "It's therapeutic," I told her. So is actual therapy, with a person who can speak. Titus speaks volumes. Titus speaks oats. The pack house had a rhythm, and I had found my place in it. Or at least, I had carved out a space that looked enough like a place that no one questioned it too closely. Morning started early. Wolves are not, as a rule, late sleepers. Something about the animal layer of the brain insisted on consciousness at dawn, regardless of what the human layer wanted, which meant that by 6 in the morning, the kitchen was already occupied by large, slightly grumpy people in various states of caffeine deficit. I had claimed the kitchen as my domain. Not officially, there was no formal title for person who feeds everyone, but practically, it was mine. I knew where every pot was. I knew the sourdough schedule. I knew that Declan would come through at 6:15 wanting toast and silence, that Sorsha would arrive at 6:30 wanting porridge and gossip, and that Callum would appear at 6:45 already showered and dressed and radiating a low-frequency authority that made the coffee cups vibrate. This particular morning, the kitchen was occupied by Ronan, Callum's beta, who was sitting on the counter eating cereal directly from the box and reading a letter that was clearly making him unhappy. "Morning," I said, tying on my apron.
"Freya?"
Ronan waved the letter. "My mother wants to know when I'm bringing someone home. She used the word grandchildren, plural, as if one theoretical child isn't enough. Tell her you're married to your work. She's met my work. She does not approve of my work. My work involves getting punched by Callum during training drills, and she thinks I should aspire higher." Ronan was the opposite of Callum in nearly every way. Lanky where Callum was broad, expressive where Callum was contained, capable of using more than 4 adjectives in a single conversation. He was also the only person in the pack house who consistently noticed when something was wrong with me, which made him both invaluable and slightly dangerous. The back door opened, bringing a blast of cold morning air and 3 wolves in the process of becoming people. Declan, Sorsha, and Maren came through in a tangle of bare feet and the particular slightly dazed look that comes from being in fur 5 minutes ago. Sorsha had a leaf in her hair. Maren was already pulling on a jumper she'd left on the hook by the door. Declan just stood there, shirtless and steaming in the cool air, with the expression of a man whose wolf had thoroughly enjoyed the run and whose human side was now regretting the distance from the tree line to the back door. "Clothes are in the mudroom," I said, not looking up from the bread I was slicing. "As always, where I put them, because I know none of you think about this in advance." "I had a plan," Declan said. "Your plan was to shift back and hope for the best. That is a plan." Sorsha padded past me, stealing a piece of bread. "Good run this morning. The ridge trail is clear all the way to the old oak. Callum went out early. He's already been and come back." I filed this away. Callum had gone for a run before dawn, which meant he hadn't slept well, which meant something was bothering him. He hadn't mentioned anything. He wouldn't mention anything. He would, however, probably mention it to Titus later. His run this morning was 43 minutes, my wolf supplied. Longer than usual. Higher elevation. He was working something out. "How do you know that?" I could feel it in the territory. The ground remembers pressure. He pushed hard on the uphill sections. My wolf tracked things I didn't ask her to track. She noticed Callum's patterns, his gait, his habits, the way the pack house settled differently around his presence. She noticed, and she told me, and I pretended it wasn't as useful as it was. Callum appeared at 6:45, precisely. The man was pathologically punctual. He came through the kitchen doorway and the room rearranged itself around him the way it always did. Not dramatically, not with anyone dropping to one knee, but in the subtle way that a group of wolves unconsciously orients toward their alpha. Shoulders squared slightly. Conversations paused for half a beat. Even Ronan sat up straighter on the counter, though he'd deny it. Callum was dressed, put together, and wearing what I privately called his alpha face, the one that said, "I am in control of everything, including my emotions," which I have filed in a locked cabinet and swallowed the key. He poured himself coffee. He sat down. He looked at the bread I'd set out. "Good bread," he said. 2 words. 2. The man could command a pack of 200 with a sentence, but he could not find a 3rd word to add to his review of my sourdough. "Thank you," I said. "It's the new starter. 3 weeks of feeding it. I adjusted the hydration ratio." Callum nodded. "Practical." Ronan caught my eye across the kitchen and made a face that clearly said, "I'm so sorry." I smiled tightly and reached for the butter knife. "The bread is exceptional. my wolf said, for what it's worth. It's not, I muttered. The hydration ratio is perfect. I can taste the difference in the crumb structure. Also, his pupils dilated when he bit into it. That's a pleasure response. He loved it. He just can't say so. I hated when she was right, which was always. I need to tell you about Callum's wolf, because it is relevant to the central injustice of my life. Callum's wolf is named Fen. I have never met Fen directly. You don't meet someone else's wolf. It's not a separate creature you can shake hands with. But I know about Fen because Callum, in rare moments of unguardedness, has let things slip. And because other wolves in the pack have told me things. And because sometimes, just sometimes, when Callum looks at me, I can see the shadow of something behind his eyes that is trying very hard to say something his mouth will not allow. Here's what I know about Fen. He is eloquent. This is the cruelest joke the universe has ever played on me. My mate, the man who calls my cassoulet adequate and my hair practical, has a wolf inside him that is, by all accounts, a poet. Ronan told me once, after too much ale, that Callum's wolf had been so overwhelmed the first time I walked into the pack house that Callum had to excuse himself and go stand in the cold for 10 minutes. What did Fen say? I'd asked, trying to sound casual and failing spectacularly. Ronan had looked at me with something between pity and amusement. I can't tell you exactly, it's not my wolf to quote. But Callum told me afterward that Fen used the word luminous and irrevocable in the same sentence. Luminous. Irrevocable. And what had come out of Callum's actual mouth when he'd walked back in from the cold and looked at me for the second time? Welcome. One word. Welcome. As if I'd arrived for a job interview. The gap between what Fen felt and what Callum said was the Grand Canyon of emotional expression, and I lived at the bottom of it, squinting up at both sides and wondering if there was a bridge somewhere I was missing. His wolf communicates in full sentences, my wolf observed. Yours communicates in single adjectives. This is a compatibility issue. It's a communication issue. That is what I said. The day Callum caught me was a Thursday. I remember this because on Wednesdays Callum had council meetings that ran late, which meant Wednesday nights were prime Titus time. And on this particular Wednesday, the council meeting had run so late that I'd pushed my session to Thursday. The argument of the week was the coat, the tactical birthday coat. I had stewed about it for 3 days, which was 2 days longer than a reasonable person would stew about outerwear, and exactly the right amount of time for me. I was mid-performance. I had the spoon. And the thing is, Titus, it is a beautiful coat. It's dark green, which is my color, and the wool is soft, and he clearly put thought into it. But the thought he put into it was about reinforced stitching. He went to a shop and said, "What coat can my wife wear that will also survive an ambush?" That was his internal process. That was the romance. Titus shifted his weight from one hoof to the other. This was his version of leaning in. I don't need him to write poetry, Titus. I don't need grand gestures. I just need him to, once, just once, say something that makes me feel like he chose me. Not the mate bond, not the wolf's instinct. Him, Callum, the man who can't find the right word for bread he obviously loves. I need him to look at me and say something that couldn't be about anyone else. I paused. My throat had gone tight. I just want to know that if the bond hadn't happened, I said, quieter now, he'd still have picked me. The stable was silent. Even Titus had stopped chewing. A throat cleared behind me. It was a very deliberate, very alpha throat clearing. The kind that carries weight and spatial awareness and the absolute certainty that the person doing it has been standing there for an unspecified but definitely too long period of time. I froze. The spoon was raised like a scepter. I was wearing my dressing gown and one sock. I looked, I am sure, like a woman in the middle of a nervous breakdown that happened to involve a horse. I turned around. Callum stood in the doorway of the tack room, his arms crossed over his chest. He was still in his council clothes, dark shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, the silver thread of his alpha mark catching the lamplight at his collar. His expression was, I still don't have the right word for it, not angry, not amused. It was the face of a man who has just discovered that the universe contains a fact he was not previously aware of, and he is not entirely sure how to categorize it. "You talk to my horse," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement delivered with the gravity of a diplomatic incident. I lowered the spoon. "You talk to your horse. I talk to him first." This was, objectively, the most childish thing a pack alpha could say. He said it with complete sincerity. "He's the only neutral party in this entire house," I said. "Everyone else takes sides. Ronan tries not to, but he leans yours because you're his alpha. Sorka leans mine because she thinks you're emotionally constipated. Declan doesn't lean at all, but that's because Declan doesn't care about anything that isn't the morning run. Titus is the only one who just listens." Callum stared at me. Then he looked at Titus. Then back at me. "How long?" he asked. 2 years. Something flickered across his face. 2 years. Give or take. He was quiet for a long moment. I could almost hear the gears turning, the wolf side of him processing the information at animal speed, while his human brain tried to construct a sentence about it. "What does he say about me?" Callum asked. "He's a political pragmatist. He sides with whoever is physically present and most likely to have carrots." That's a betrayal. That's diplomacy. Callum looked at Titus. Titus, who had been watching this exchange with the air of someone thoroughly enjoying a drama that was, for once, not his problem, flicked an ear and looked away with an expression I can only describe as guilty. "He sided with you about the window thing," I said. "The window thing was a real issue." "The window thing was May, Callum. It was May. The only thing coming through that window was a cross breeze and possibly a moth. Reconnaissance can be conducted through any unsecured— Don't you dare say access point again." We glared at each other across Titus's broad back. The horse stood between us like a living negotiating table, his head swinging slowly from one side to the other, tracking the volley. And then, I don't know which of us started it, we laughed. It came out of nowhere, a crack in the standoff. Callum's laugh was rare and slightly rusty, like a machine that hadn't been used recently and was surprised to find itself operational. Mine was closer to hysteria. We stood in the straw-scented dark, laughing at the absolute absurdity of 2 grown adults conducting couples therapy through a horse. Titus looked enormously pleased with himself. "We're ridiculous," I said, wiping my eyes. Callum's expression softened. The alpha face was gone, replaced by something younger and more uncertain. "We may be ridiculous," he agreed. He uncrossed his arms. He looked at Titus, then at me, and something settled in his jaw, the look of a man making a decision. "Thursdays," he said. "What?" "I'll take Mondays. You take Thursdays. We stop overlapping." I stared at him. "You want to formalize the horse therapy schedule?" "I want to respect the process." "The process is talking to a horse, Callum. And it's working," he paused. "For both of us, apparently." He wasn't wrong. That was the infuriating part. "Fine," I said. "Thursdays. Mondays. And if there's an emergency, a midweek crisis, a bean-related incident, emergency sessions can be arranged," Callum said. And I swear on my grandmother's bay leaf bush, the corner of his mouth twitched. Titus was promoted that night. Unofficially, obviously. There was no ceremony. But Callum gave him an extra apple and I gave him a carrot, and between us there was the unspoken understanding that this horse now held a position of enormous therapeutic responsibility. He could not speak. He did not need to. The system worked. That was the maddening thing. It actually genuinely worked. Callum's Monday sessions ran long. I knew this because Titus always smelled faintly of Callum's soap on Tuesday mornings, which meant Callum had been leaning against him, which meant the shoulders had dropped, which meant real things had been said. My Thursday sessions were less restrained. I paced, I gestured, I occasionally brought props. Once I brought the actual coat, so Titus could see the reinforced stitching for himself. He cannot see stitching, my wolf pointed out. He is a horse. He sees movement, contrast, and things that might be predators. He can see the principle of the thing. No, he can't. He's a horse. But something was shifting between Callum and me. Not dramatically. Callum didn't suddenly become a man of eloquent feeling. He still called things adequate. He still gave me practical compliments that made me want to put my head through a wall. But there was a new quality to our arguments. They were shorter. They resolved faster. And occasionally, just occasionally, he would say something that landed differently. "The stew tonight," he said one evening after a Monday with Titus. "It reminded me of something my mother used to make. Before." Before meant before his mother died. Before his father became the kind of alpha who ruled with silence and distance. Before Callum learned that strength meant not needing anyone. He didn't say any of that. He just said, before. But the word carried everything. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. His heart rate increased when he said it, my wolf observed. He was nervous. That cost him something. I knew. I could feel it, not through the bond exactly, but in the way you feel a change in weather. Something in the air between us was different. Warmer, more careful. We were communicating. Through a horse, at one remove, on alternating days, but we were communicating. And the things we were telling Titus were making their way, slowly and indirectly, into the space between us. I found Callum one evening out behind the woodshed, mid-shift and not caring who saw. He hadn't even gone to the tree line, just walked out the back door, stripped his shirt, and let the change take him right there in the yard. It wasn't dramatic. It was the wolf equivalent of a long exhale after a hard day. One moment he was a broad-shouldered man rubbing his face with both hands. The next he was a massive gray wolf, shaking off the last of his human shape, the way a dog shakes off water. He stood there for a moment, nose to the wind, reading things in the air I couldn't parse. Then he padded over to the stone wall, lay down against it, and closed his eyes. He looked tired. Even in wolf form, he looked tired. The way his weight settled, the angle of his ears, the body language of a wolf who wasn't running from anything or toward anything, just needed to not be a person for 10 minutes. I sat on the back step and watched him. He knew I was there, one ear swiveled in my direction, then relaxed. Acknowledgement without obligation. The wolf version of, "I know, stay if you want." So I stayed, and for 20 minutes we sat in the quiet, not talking, not needing to, while the sun went down behind the hills and the pack house hummed with life around us. He shifted back eventually, pulled his shirt on, and walked past me into the kitchen. As he passed, his hand brushed my shoulder. That was all. But it was enough. Ronan figured it out on a Tuesday. He found me in the kitchen, as usual, and sat on the counter, as usual, and ate cereal from the box, as usual. But he was watching me with the particular look he got when he was assembling a theory. "You've been going to the stables," he said. "I like the stables. Every Thursday. Horses need consistency. At 10 at night. Nocturnal horses." Ronan put down the cereal box. "Callum goes on Mondays." I said nothing. This was a tactical error. Silence with Ronan was confirmation. "You're both talking to the horse," he said. "Ronan, you're both talking to the horse and you've scheduled it. You have a system. You have a horse-based relationship management system." His face was doing something complicated, caught between disbelief, amusement, and what I think was genuine concern. "How long?" "Me or him?" "Oh my God, both." "Him, years. Me, about 5 months. The formal schedule, 3 weeks. Ronan stared at the ceiling. "I am the beta of this pack. My job, my actual, literal job, is to manage the emotional well-being of the alpha and his mate. And you're telling me I've been outperformed by a Clydesdale? Clydesdale Cross. That doesn't help, Freya." I poured him coffee, which was my way of apologizing for things I wasn't actually sorry about. Titus doesn't judge. He doesn't take sides. He doesn't try to fix things. He just stands there, and you talk, and by the time you're done talking, the thing doesn't feel as heavy. Ronan took the coffee. He looked at it. He looked at me. Does it work? Better than anything else has. He was quiet for a moment, then, has Callum ever said anything to you about what he tells the horse? No. Have you ever asked? No. Has it occurred to you that you're both pouring your hearts out to the same animal and neither of you knows what the other one is saying? I opened my mouth, closed it. He has a point, my wolf said, an irritating, accurate point. Ronan watched the realization land on my face. You're using the horse to avoid talking to each other. We're using the horse to process so that we can talk to each other. Are you talking to each other? More than before? I thought about this. We were. Callum had mentioned his mother. I had stopped hiding how much the adequate thing bothered me. But were we actually saying the things we told Titus? Or were we saying slightly softened, carefully edited versions and leaving the real thing in the stables? I need to think about that, I said. You could think about it out loud, to a person who can respond. Are you volunteering? Absolutely not. I want no part of this. I'm just observing that you have a communication problem and your solution is a horse. And I want it on record that I flagged this. Flagged. Flagged. He took his coffee and slid off the counter. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, he's different on Tuesdays, after his Monday sessions. Lighter. Whatever he's telling that horse, it's good for him. He left. I stood in the kitchen, holding a bread knife, and thought about all the things I'd told Titus that I'd never told Callum. The pack gathering happened 3 weeks later, and it broke the system. It wasn't a formal event, just a seasonal dinner, the kind the pack did 4 times a year to mark the turn of the weather. 200 wolves in the great hall. Long tables, more food than seemed structurally possible. I'd been cooking for 2 days. The kitchen was my battlefield, and I had won it, decisively, with a roast that could feed a small army, and 3 desserts because I couldn't decide, and refusing to decide was its own kind of decision. The problem wasn't the food. The problem was Callum's speech. The alpha always spoke at gatherings, a few words about the pack, the season, the state of things. Callum was not a natural public speaker. His strength was in presence, not rhetoric. But he managed these addresses with the competence of a man who had done them many times and felt about them the way one feels about dental appointments. This time, though, he went off script. He'd been talking about the harvest, the border agreements, the usual pack business. Then he paused, looked at his hands, and said, My father used to give these speeches. He was better at them than I am. He could fill a room with his voice and make every wolf in it feel like they belonged to something larger than themselves. I have never been able to do that. The hall went very still. What I can do, he continued, his voice rough at the edges, is tell you that this pack is my life. That every decision I make for the people in this room. That I don't always get it right. That I am... He stopped, swallowed. Still learning how to be what you need. He sat down. The hall erupted in the kind of applause that isn't about performance, but about recognition. The sound of 200 people saying, we know, it's all right. I sat at the head table with my hands in my lap and my throat so tight I couldn't swallow. Because I knew where those words had come from. Those weren't council meeting words. Those weren't alpha address words. Those were Monday night in the stables words. He had said them to Titus first. I was sure of it. And hearing them here, in public, meant they had traveled from the safest, most private place he had, out into the most exposed. His hands are shaking, my wolf said quietly. Under the table. His hands are shaking. I reached under the table and put my hand over his. He startled. Then his fingers closed around mine, tight and slightly desperate. and he didn't let go for the rest of the evening. Later, clearing the tables, Sorsha found me stacking plates and hip-checked me gently. "That was something," she said. "The speech." "It was. He's not his father, you know." She said it simply, like a fact about weather. His father would never have said that, not to us, not to anyone. "I know." She studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You're good for him, Freya. I don't know if anyone tells you that, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I almost laughed. What I was doing was talking to a horse, but Sorsha didn't need to know that. Ronan caught my eye from across the hall. His expression said, "The horse didn't teach him that. You did." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure at all. After the gathering, things got complicated. Not between us, between me and Titus. Because I had started telling Titus the real things. Not the bean complaints, not the window disputes, not the ongoing saga of Callum's tragic gift-giving. Those were the surface layer, the comedy routine. The material that was safe to say out loud because it didn't cost anything. Underneath all of that was a question I'd been carrying since the day the mate bond clicked into place. And it had teeth. I went to the stables on a Thursday, and for the first time, I didn't bring a prop. I didn't pace. I didn't perform. I sat down on a hay bale across from Titus, and I was quiet for a long time. "Here's the thing," I said finally. My voice sounded strange to me, smaller, without the comedy armor. The mate bond chose us. Callum didn't choose me. I didn't choose him. We were standing in a room and something clicked, and that was it. Decided. Done. Titus watched me, his dark eyes steady. "And he's good to me. He is. He's steady and he's loyal, and he would die for me without thinking about it. I know that. But dying for someone isn't the same as choosing them. Dying for someone is instinct. It's the bond. It's his wolf." I looked down at my hands. "I want to know if the man, not the wolf, not the alpha, just Callum, would pick me. If none of this had happened, if he'd met me in a shop or at a market or on a road somewhere, with no bond and no wolf pulling him toward me, would he look at me and think her, or would he walk right past?" The silence in the stable was total. Even the wind outside had stopped. Because I'm not the obvious choice. I'm not the kind of mate that legends are made about. I'm a woman who talks to horses and bakes bread and argues about windows. And I'm afraid. I'm afraid that without the bond, I wouldn't be enough for someone like him to notice. "Stop," my wolf said, and her voice had lost its usual clinical edge. She sounded raw. "Stop. That is not true. You don't know that. I am literally inside your body. I know your worth better than any external entity ever could. The bond did not create something from nothing. It recognized what was already there." That's a nice idea. It is not an idea. It is a biological fact. Mate bonds do not function on vacancy. They require— "I don't want the biology," I said, loud enough that Titus tossed his head. "I don't want the explanation of why the bond works. I want—" I stopped. "I want him to say it himself," I whispered, without the bond talking for him. Just once. Titus lowered his head and rested it against my shoulder. The weight of it was enormous and warm and exactly right. I sat there until my legs were stiff and my eyes were dry, and the candle on the stable wall had burned down to a stub. Then I went inside and got into bed next to Callum, who was asleep, and I lay in the dark and listened to him breathe, and wondered if he would ever say the thing I needed to hear, without a horse to rehearse it with first. I didn't know what Callum told Titus on Mondays. I knew the sessions were long, sometimes over an hour. I knew they left traces: hay on his good shirt, a certain looseness in his shoulders the next day, a distracted quality at breakfast, as if he were still mid-conversation and hadn't quite returned. What I didn't know was the content, the substance, the actual words he offered to a horse in the privacy of a dark stable while the pack slept. I found out because I went looking for them. I should be honest about that. I could tell you I stumbled across it, that I happened to be passing, that some innocent errand brought me to the stables on a Monday night. But I have been talking to a horse about honesty for months, and the least I can do is practice it. It was a Monday. I hadn't been able to sleep. My wolf was restless, pacing the edges of my consciousness with that specific agitation she got when something was about to change and she could feel it before I could. The stable light was on. I knew what that meant. I knew whose time it was. And I went anyway. I told myself I'd just check the light, just see if he was all right. I told myself a lot of things in the 30 seconds it took to cross the courtyard, and my wolf called me a liar on every single one. "You know what you're doing," she said. "You know exactly what you're doing." "I know," I whispered. "And you're going to do it anyway." "Yes." She went quiet. Not in disapproval, in something closer to recognition. The wolf part of me understood what it was to need information badly enough to break a rule for it. She would have done the same. She just would have been less conflicted about it. The stable door was open a crack. I could smell the hay, the horse, and underneath it, Callum, his soap, his skin, the particular note of his scent that my wolf catalogued as home, and my human brain catalogued as the man I might be about to betray. I pressed my back against the wall outside the door. I was a wolf. I knew my scent would linger on these stones, that by morning he would know someone had been here, that his nose would recognize me as surely as his eyes would. I knew all of this, and I stayed. Because his voice was carrying through the crack in the door, and what he was saying had stopped my heart. And the worst part is, I know I'm doing it. I know I'm failing. Every time she makes something incredible, I hear myself say adequate, or good, or practical, and inside I'm screaming. I pressed my hand flat against the stone wall. Fen calls her. He uses words I don't even know how to say out loud. He says she's the warm center. He says she's the reason the territory smells like home. He says, Callum's voice cracked. He says she's irrevocable. That's his word, not mine. Mine are all wrong. A long pause. Titus's breathing, slow and steady. Right now, Callum said, his voice raw. Right now, Fen is saying, he's saying, tell her, you coward. Tell her she's the reason you get up. Tell her the bread is the best thing you've ever eaten, and you'd rather choke than call it practical one more time. Tell her you love her in a way that has nothing to do with this bond, and everything to do with the fact that she argues about windows and talks to horses and burned the scones last week, and you would have eaten every single one without complaint because she made them, and that is enough. That is always enough. His voice was thick, ragged. Fen has an entire speech, Titus, a beautiful one, and I have adequate. That's what gets past my throat. That is the fraction of what I feel that my mouth is capable of delivering. I wasn't breathing. The cold stone was under my fingers and I couldn't feel it. My father never told my mother he loved her. Not once. He thought love was a vulnerability. He thought that if he said it out loud, it would become a weapon someone could use against him. So he was strong and he was silent, and my mother spent their entire bonding wondering if he chose her or if the bond chose for him. The air left my lungs, and I swore I wouldn't be him. I swore I would be different. But I stand there, looking at her, and the words, they're right there, Titus. They're right there in my chest. I can feel them. And what comes out is practical. What comes out is good bread. What comes out is every useless, empty, adequate word that tells her nothing. I heard him lean against something, the stall door maybe, or Titus himself. She thinks I don't choose her, he said, so quietly I almost missed it. I know she does. I heard her say it once. Not to me, she'd never say it to me. She said it to you. His voice dropped further. She asked you if I would pick her without the bond. And I wanted to walk in and tell her that the bond has nothing to do with it, that I picked her the moment she burned my toast and told me to deal with it, that I pick her every morning when she's covered in flour and arguing with the sourdough. But I didn't. I stood there, and I left, because I was afraid I'd open my mouth and the word that would come out would be adequate, and it would break her heart, and I would rather say nothing than say the wrong thing. A long, shuddering breath. What is wrong with me, Titus? The silence was enormous. Titus shifted his weight. Somewhere in the stables, another horse sighed. I was crying, standing against the stone wall with my hand over my mouth, crying silently, while the most emotionally inarticulate man in the world gave the most articulate speech of his life to a horse. My scent was everywhere, on the stones, in the air, salt and grief and a desperate tenderness that my wolf was doing nothing to suppress. Go in, my wolf said. Go in right now. I couldn't. If I went in, he would know I had heard. He would see my tears and smell the eavesdropping on me, and the alpha face would come back, and the walls would go up, and this raw, shattered, beautiful version of him would disappear behind the man who called bread practical. He needs to know you heard. He said it to the horse, not to me, because he can't say it to you. That is the entire problem. And you standing out here, hearing it through a wall, is exactly the same thing you've been doing for months, receiving his feelings at one remove, through a horse instead of face to face. You are doing the same thing he is. Go. In. She was right. She was so completely, devastatingly right that it hurt. But I didn't go in. I went back inside, tracking my own scent across the courtyard like a confession written in footprints, and got into bed and lay there vibrating with everything I now knew and couldn't say. The next 3 days were the worst of our marriage. Not because we fought. We didn't fight. Fighting would have been easy. Fighting was our language, our comfort zone, the familiar terrain where we both knew the steps. What happened instead was worse. A terrible, careful politeness. I couldn't look at Callum without hearing his voice in the stable. I would choose her in every version of every life. Every time he said something, "Good morning, pass the salt, the weather's turned," I heard the ghost of what he actually meant underneath it, and the gap between the two was unbearable. He knew something was wrong. Of course he knew. My wolf was broadcasting distress like a signal fire, and his wolf would have picked it up immediately. But more than that, he knew because of the scent. I saw it on the second morning, the brief flicker in his expression when he came through the kitchen. His nostrils flared, barely perceptibly. His eyes found mine. And I watched him put it together. The scent on the stones, the timing, Monday night. He knew I'd been there. And now he knew that I knew. Neither of us said a word. "You're quiet," he said on Wednesday morning. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't argued with me in 3 days. You always argue with me." "Maybe I don't have anything to argue about." He looked at me with an expression of pure alarm, as if the absence of argument was itself a crisis, which for us, it was. "Tell him," my wolf said. She had been saying this on repeat for 72 hours. "Tell him what you heard." I couldn't, because telling him meant admitting I had gone looking. Not stumbled across, gone looking. I had crossed into Monday on purpose, knowing what I was doing, because I needed to hear what he wouldn't say to me. And the shame of that, the deliberate violation of the one agreement we'd made, sat right next to the overwhelming tenderness of what I'd heard, and the two feelings were so tangled I couldn't separate them. Callum went for a run on Wednesday evening. Not a morning run, an evening one, alone, after dinner. I watched him from the kitchen window. He stripped his shirt on the back step, shifted fast and hard, and was gone into the trees before anyone else in the house registered the back door opening. The shift had been sharp, almost angry, the kind you do when your skin feels too small and your body needs to be something else for a while. He was gone for over an hour. When he came back, he shifted in the yard, pulled on the clothes I'd left on the step for him, and came inside, smelling like pine and cold air, and something unresolved. "Good run?" I asked. Adequate, he said, and the word landed between us like a stone. Ronan noticed, because Ronan always noticed. Something's wrong with you two, he said, catching me in the hallway. You're being nice to each other. It's unsettling. Please go back to arguing about windows. We're fine, Ronan. You are not fine. He asked me this morning if I thought you were upset, and when I said I didn't know, he asked me if I thought the bread was up to its usual standard, which is Callum speak for, is my mate okay? And I'm asking about bread because I don't know how to ask about feelings. I can't talk about this right now. Can you talk about it to the horse? Ronan. He held up his hands. I'm just saying, the horse has a better track record than either of you. Thursday came. I went to the stables, but this time I couldn't talk. I sat on the hay bale, Titus standing over me, and I had nothing. No rant, no comedy routine, no spoon-waving performance about beans or coats or windows, just the enormous, tender, terrifying weight of knowing exactly how my mate felt about me and being completely unable to tell him I knew. I heard him, I told Titus. Monday night. I went on purpose. I stood outside the door and I listened to everything. Titus lowered his head. He loves me, Titus. Not adequately, not practically, not in a way that sounds like a military briefing. He loves me in a way that made him cry talking to a horse about it, because he can't say it to me. I rubbed my face with both hands. And I love him in a way that makes me tell a horse my deepest fears instead of telling him. We are the same. We are exactly the same broken thing. We are two people who can be completely honest with a horse and completely terrified of each other. That is the most accurate thing you have ever said, my wolf observed. Are you going to do anything about it? I don't know how. You could start by being in the same room as him and opening your mouth. That's the part that doesn't work. It doesn't work because you both think vulnerability is a cliff. You think if you say the real thing, you'll fall. But you've both already said the real thing, to the horse. The words exist. You've practiced them. Now you just have to say them in the right direction. I looked at Titus. He blinked at me, slow and patient. You know everything, I said to him. You know my worst fear and his worst fear and exactly how perfectly they mirror each other. You know that he thinks he's his father, and I think I'm not enough, and that we're both wrong. You know all of it, and you can't tell either of us. Titus nudged my hand. I gave him a carrot. You're a very good therapist, I said, but I think we need to fire you. I found Callum in the armory. He was cleaning a sword that didn't need cleaning, his version of stress baking, the methodical physical task he retreated to when his brain was too full. I stood in the doorway. He looked up. The alpha face was firmly in place, but underneath it I could see the worry, the 3-day low-grade panic of a man who knew his mate was upset and couldn't figure out how to fix it. And underneath even that, the knowledge we were both carrying. He knew I'd heard him. I knew he knew. The only thing left was to stop pretending otherwise. We need to talk, I said. Not to Titus. To each other. He set the sword down carefully. All right. Not here, the stables. He looked at me and I saw the question in his eyes. Why there? But he nodded and followed me across the courtyard. The stables were warm and quiet. Titus was in his stall, ears pricked, watching us both with the air of a professional who sensed a breakthrough session approaching. I sat on the hay bale. Callum stood because Callum always stood when he was nervous. He couldn't be still and seated at the same time. I was here on Monday night, I said. The silence that followed was enormous. I know, he said. I know you know. I could see it on your face Tuesday morning, he nodded. A muscle worked in his jaw. I didn't stumble across it, I said, because the honesty had to be complete or it wasn't honesty at all. I came on purpose. I couldn't sleep and the light was on and I needed to hear what you wouldn't say to me. I broke our agreement. I'm sorry. He was quiet for a long time. Then, I broke it first. I looked at him. Your Thursday session, he said, a few weeks ago. I wasn't there by accident either. I told you I came back for a bridal. There was no bridal. I came because... He stopped. His hands were at his sides, opening and closing. I needed to know what you say to him. About me. About us. The same way you needed to know what I say. The honesty of it cracked something open in my chest. We've been spying on each other through a horse, I said. Yes. That is genuinely insane. Yes. The laugh that escaped me was small and wet and entirely involuntary. Callum's mouth twitched. The things I said on Monday, he began, and I could hear it, the terrified, halting effort of a man trying to take words he'd given to a horse and redirect them at a person who mattered. I meant all of it. I know you heard. I know it's not the same as saying it to you directly, but... Say it again, I said. He blinked. What? The words you said to Titus. Say them to me. Right now, in this room. To my face. He looked stricken. I watched him physically fight the instinct to shut down, to retreat behind the alpha face, to protect himself the way his father had taught him, by saying nothing. What came out was this. You... He swallowed. You burned the scones. Last week, and I ate 3. I stared at him. They were terrible, he said, his voice shaking. They were objectively, measurably terrible. And I ate 3 of them, because you made them. And anything you make, bread, scones, beans, a mess of the kitchen at 2 a.m, I will eat, and it will be the best thing I've ever tasted, because it came from you. He was trembling, actually trembling. The alpha of the Stonecrag pack. A man who could stare down rival wolves without blinking, was shaking because he was trying to tell his wife she mattered. That is not what Fen says, he continued, his voice cracking. Fen says you are irrevocable and luminous and the warm center of everything. Fen is better at this than I am. Fen has always been better at this. But Fen's words are his, and these words are mine. And mine are about burned scones, because that is the truest thing I know how to say. He stopped, breathing hard, looking at me like a man who had just jumped off something very high and wasn't sure if there was ground below. I would choose you, he said, without the bond, without the wolf, in a shop, on a road, in any room, in any life. I would look at you burning scones and I would think, her. Every time. I kissed him, or he kissed me, or we met somewhere in the middle, which is how most things between us worked. A collision that was also a collaboration, slightly chaotic and entirely right. Titus huffed behind us. A warm, satisfied sound, like a therapist whose most difficult clients had finally had a breakthrough. Acceptable, my wolf said. She sounded, for the first time in months, genuinely pleased. His heart rate indicates sincerity. The trembling is authentic. I am cautiously optimistic about this development. Thank you, I murmured against Callum's mouth. I wasn't talking to him. I was talking to the horse. Callum pulled back slightly. Did you just thank the horse? He did a lot of the groundwork. He stood there and ate oats. Don't diminish his process. Callum's forehead rested against mine. I felt him smile, a real one, the kind that reached his eyes and changed the shape of his whole face. I had seen this smile 4 times in our entire marriage. Titus had probably seen it 400. I love you, Callum said, quietly, without rehearsal, without a stable and a horse to practice with first. I'm going to be terrible at saying it. I'm going to call things adequate. I'm going to compliment your cooking by calling it serviceable. You will want to strangle me. Frequently. But I will mean it. Every time. Even when the word is wrong. I know, I said. I've always known. I just needed to hear you say it to something other than a horse. I said it to you. You said it to a horse first. I was eavesdropping. We'll call it a soft launch. I laughed. He laughed. Titus swished his tail. Things changed after that. Not dramatically. We were not people built for dramatic transformation. We were built for incremental improvement, for slow thaws, for the kind of progress that looks from the outside like two stubborn wolves learning to bend. Callum still called things adequate, but now, sometimes, he'd catch himself and pause and add something. The soup is adequate. It's also, I had 2 bowls, and I'm thinking about a third. He'd look at me as if to check, was that better? And I would nod, because it was. It was so much better. I still went to the stables. Some habits are worth keeping. But I brought Callum with me now sometimes, and we'd sit on opposite hay bales with Titus between us and talk. Not to the horse, to each other, with the horse as a witness. Ronan discovered the joint sessions within a week, because Ronan discovered everything within a week. You've upgraded from parallel horse therapy to couples horse therapy, he said, leaning in the stable doorway. This is either progress or a further descent into madness, and I genuinely cannot tell which. Progress, I said. Madness, Callum said. We looked at each other, shrugged. Both, we said. Ronan threw up his hands and left, but I caught him smiling as he turned away. The pack noticed, too, in their quiet, wolfish way. Sorsha told me I seemed lighter. Declan asked Callum if something had changed, and Callum said, I am pursuing ongoing improvements in interpersonal communication, which was the most Callum sentence in the history of language, and somehow also the sweetest thing he could have said. Marin asked me directly, Are you and the Alpha all right? You're arguing less. We're arguing better, I said. There's a difference. On a Sunday morning, Callum found me in the kitchen early, before anyone else was up, before the cereal box and the morning run and the 6:45 coffee. He stood in the doorway and watched me knead bread, and I could feel him working up to something, the particular tension of a man assembling a sentence from parts that didn't want to fit together. Come for a run, he said. I looked at him. Now? Now. We went out the back door together. The air was cold and sharp and smelled like wet earth and the last of the night. We shifted at the tree line, his wolf large and gray and steady, mine smaller and darker and already annoyed by the cold. We ran the ridge trail in the early light, shoulder to shoulder, not racing, not performing, just moving through the territory together in the oldest language wolves have. At the top of the ridge we stopped. The valley spread out below us, the pack house a warm glow in the distance. Callum's wolf sat and looked out over it, and I sat beside him, and for a long time we just breathed. He leaned into me, his wolf's shoulder pressed against mine, solid, warm, present. In wolf form, there were no words to get wrong. No adequate, no practical. Just the weight of him against me, saying everything his human mouth couldn't. We ran back as the sun came up. Shifted in the yard. I pulled on the jumper I'd left on the step, and he pulled on his shirt, and we went inside to make coffee, and neither of us said a word about it, because nothing needed to be said. One evening, a month after the breakthrough, I made the cassoulet again. The original recipe, soaked beans, smoked hock from Garrity's, my grandmother's bay leaf. I set it on the table at dinner, in front of the pack, and looked at Callum. He took a bite, chewed slowly. The hall was noisy, Declan arguing with Sorsha about the morning run, Ronan reading another letter from his mother with an expression of theatrical despair, Marin arm-wrestling someone at the far end of the table. But at our end, it was quiet. Callum set down his spoon. He looked at me. And in full view of whoever happened to be watching, with no horse to rehearse with, no stable to hide in, he said, These beans are not adequate. I raised an eyebrow. They are, he said, transcendent. A grin spread across my face. He reached under the table and found my hand. Behind us, through the window, I could just see the stable, the light from Titus's stall glowing warm in the dark. The greatest therapist in the Stone Crag pack was probably asleep, or eating oats, or standing in the comfortable silence of a stall that had held more honesty than most conversations ever would. He could not speak. He did not need to. Some things don't require words. They just require someone willing to stand there and absorb. A satisfactory conclusion, my wolf said. The horse should receive a bonus. What's a horse bonus? Apples, obviously. I squeezed Callum's hand. He squeezed back. It was not adequate. It was not sufficient. It was everything.